I hear this a lot, especially from guys over 40, but this is also something I kind of believed in my youth when this was starting to be more of a trend. And I'm talking about this functional training versus putting on muscle mass or training for hypertrophy argument. And don't get me wrong, I totally understand where people are coming from, where people will say, I don't want to look big and bulky like a bodybuilder, not looking to get on stage or compete in a powerlifting competition. I just want functional, practical strength that can help me make my life easier. I can go ahead and play with my kids and my family and keeps me active into old age. But the truth is, putting on muscle is extremely functional. In fact, it's one of the most functional things you can do. And more times than not, and of course you have different goals and interests, some people resort to things such as more long distance running or doing just simple calisthenics or a simple routine in the name of replacing and building muscle. And objectively on paper, while it is of course hard to control your diet and get down to a nice maintenance body weight, of course, putting on muscle mass is a little more difficult. It takes a little more time, but the rewards are definitely worth it, especially when you start to get 60, 70 and beyond, especially when you start looking at some of the research. So I'm gonna break down my arguments in this video, but it should go without saying, there is a point of diminishing returns, and everything I'm actually talking about is doing so 100% natural, using no external substances whatsoever, just your God-given abilities and the resources that you have. And of course, doing so in the most simple, straightforward way that I can. So if you guys like this type of content, please consider giving this a like, share, and subscribe if you don't have already done so. And just so we're clear and on the same page here, I am talking about putting on and actually building muscle mass and tissue versus sometimes what you see people seeing, which is just losing weight and you actually see more visible muscle, where you have someone who's pretty much already skinny. And I see it even with like 40 plus channels, you have guys that are maybe 10 or sub 10% body fat, and they're just kind of really more skinnier guys. Again, definitely healthy and fit, do not get me wrong, but I'm talking about actually putting on muscle mass. And the other end of the spectrum of pushback I hear is that, well, you can be strong but not actually have muscle. That is true to a certain extent, but even some of the biggest gurus in traditional weightlifting and strength training that are more so not even focused on what we consider traditional hypertrophy do acknowledge the fact that you cannot have muscles and not be strong. They definitely are correlated and go hand in hand.
That's not true.
You don't know any bodybuilders. Like, go arm wrestle a bodybuilder. Yeah. See how it goes for you.
They're big, they're strong.
If a dude has 24-inch
don't
arms,
have muscles are not made of air.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because yes, you can get stronger neurologically, say better coordination, firing patterns without adding much muscle at first. That's why beginners gain a lot of strength fast. But over time, if you never build muscle tissue, your ceiling is essentially very low. And research shows your muscle cross-sectional area strongly correlates with strength output, meaning bigger muscles equal more potential strength. And if you have the right program, it is very easy and very predictable to get strong fairly quickly. Conversely, to actually building and putting on more muscle tissue, which does take some time, effort, and continual consistency. And with the muscle and body, again, genetics is for sure a factor, but it still goes without saying, if you look at certain parts of the body, it is very site specific. So you can tell if some area is gonna be weaker or stronger, a lot of times just by looking at the actual limb itself. And this is just basic laws of specificity, or the SEB principle of specific adaptation to imposed demands. It is not uncommon whenever I see someone who's an advocate of functional training, who's doing things like kettlebells, mace swings, or just basic calisthenics, to maybe have skinnier lower limbs or a skinnier lower body. And that is because they are just not adequately loading or giving efficient, effective stress to that musculature. In which case you might push back and say, well, that's not very functional. The person does not need to have big legs or big arms, etc. And there is maybe a context and nuance to that. But now I want to put forward some of the research that would probably argue otherwise. So for instance, there was a 2025 meta-analysis that found that lower muscle mass increases the risk of functional decline by about 25% in older adults. In other words, less muscle equals higher odds you'll lose the ability to do daily tasks, simply walking upstairs, carrying groceries, getting up and down off a seat. And this really shouldn't be too controversial. If there's not visible present muscle there, your strength capabilities are going to be diminished. And not to mention, you start factoring in progressive muscle loss with sarcopenia as we age, which is essentially a use it or lose it phenomenon. And so sarcopenia is that age-related muscle loss, which is predictable and is going to happen to all of us. But if you start consistently resistance training with a solid program, and if you start now, you can hold off the steep decline that will happen to those that are not doing progressive resistance training and are also working towards building strength. Because muscle atrophy, or just muscle loss, begins as early as roughly 40 years old, but can even start earlier than that if you don't actually start doing some resistance training. One review stated that on average, muscle declines 8% per decade from age 40 to 70. So it should not be surprising that consistent studies show on sarcopenia that loss of muscle mass is directly linked to loss of function. Again, walking, standing, climbing chairs, etc. So even if someone says they feel strong, but there's not adequate muscle being present, the research does show that they're more likely to lose muscle mass sooner versus those that have built up and put in the effort and actually built up those muscle mass reserves. Because once you've built it up, many people have said this throughout the years, as you put that work in continually and build up muscle mass, you don't need to do as much work to kind of maintain it. And that muscle mass that you built up does seem to hold on and can stay fairly present throughout ripe old age. And so getting down to brass tacks and trying to explain what exactly am I talking about, I'm not trying to discourage you from picking up a kettlebell, dumbbell, doing calisthenics, push-ups, body weight squats, suspension trainers. All those things are awesome, great things, and are gonna help build strength, functional capacity, and even muscle. My point is, on top of those, if you actually want to maximize some of the benefits, of which we haven't even talked about the metabolic benefits of just carrying on some extra muscle and how well things work just in that regard, the point is, muscle tissue is a very valuable and very practical functional resource. So when I hear people push back and say, I don't want to do these types of exercises because I don't want to get big and bulky, you're not guaranteed to get big and bulky. That's not what we're trying to do here. We are trying to maximize the most efficient exercises possible that are going to build muscle in hopefully the most pain-free way for your capabilities and also the most efficient path. Because I think we'd all would like to admit that yes, we want to enjoy our exercise sessions and get something out of it, and maybe we don't have the confines and space for certain tools. That should go without saying. But if we're going to go into the gym and we can pick certain specific exercises and ways of working out that'll more likely produce increases in lean muscle tissue, that would be the more ideal situation versus just going in here and just doing something for resistance for the sake of resistance. Because then I can just go in my house and start just picking things up and down, just doing little body weight squats throughout the day with something heavy in my hand. That would be by default definitely functional strength, but the goal is here to actually positively adapt to put on more muscle. Therefore, your strength capabilities, and like I said earlier, your strength ceiling actually increases, because as you increase that neuromuscular coordination of just building raw strength, which happens very quickly, the next thing we got to do is as we build up that muscle tissue to actually get bigger, it's essentially a 1-2 punch. You have more energy and storage capabilities in that muscle is going to be slower to fatigue. It can do essentially more work over time. It'll also help protect your joints, tendons, and ligaments by doing some of the load versus having those take the grunt of it. Does that mean you go out and train like a bodybuilder? You know, possibly. You can do that with good range of motion and good exercise selections and still reap all those functional benefits. Because if you do get strong and you put on muscle tissue and then you go out and do your daily life, the transfer is always going to be there. But with regards to if one is safer versus the other, I honestly personally think that doing basic, safe, traditional resistance training, you could say bodybuilding exercises, because all the way they're kind of performed, are very safe and sometimes safer than some of these ballistic and or kind of highly skill-based functional training exercises that some people just do not have the time, patience, or just doing them properly to actually reap some of the actual benefits. Now, I'm going to share some of those with you guys in some other future videos, and I'm happy to answer some of those questions. But I just want to present this argument to a lot of you guys that you should not be shying away from actually building lean body tissue versus just this argument or this idea that functional strength is somehow superior. And I'll leave you with this, something I heard at a conference and the speaker said one time that always stuck with me, and that is that functional training is highly subjective. It's like the term inner beauty. You can't really define it, and therefore it is essentially meaningless. If you can't objectively define what functional training is, you have to kind of ask yourself if what you're doing is the most efficient way possible to reap many of the benefits from resistance training. Hopefully you guys found this informative. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys for watching.